Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. James Henderson was 89 years old, but his mind was still as sharp as a young man's. A World War II veteran, he had survived battles many could not even imagine. His body bore the marks of those years, a hunched back, rough hands, and a slight tremor when he held a cup of coffee. But his eyes still shone with the determination of a man who had never backed down in the face of danger. He lived alone in Willow Creek, a quiet little town where everyone knew his name and respected his history. His days were simple, tending his garden, walking in the park, reminiscing about wartime memories, and receiving occasional visits from his son Michael. Life seemed peaceful, almost still, until one day an unexpected threat appeared, on the road leading to the market. That day, the roar of engines shattered the usual calm. A group of arrogant, young, and noisy bikers appeared behind his old 1970s Chevrolet. They saw him as nothing more than a fragile old man, easy prey. But James didn't yet know that they were about to discover that an 89-year-old veteran could still command respect and change the course of a confrontation simply with his composure and a phone call. What followed would mark Willow Creek and remind everyone that age and experience are silent but powerful weapons. James Henderson drove slowly down Willow Creek's main road, his old Chevrolet roaring gently over the hot summer asphalt. The sun was beating down hard, making the worn metal of his car gleam. He'd planned to stop by the market to buy fresh vegetables and a few flowers for his garden. His day was supposed to be peaceful, but it wasn't. A sudden roar ripped through the air. James jumped slightly at the sound of several motorcycles approaching behind him. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a group of at least 5 riders, their helmets gleaming in the sunlight, their bikes roaring like angry beasts. At their head, a tall, imposing man with visible tattoos on his arms was pounding the handlebars forcefully. His name was Rick Malone, and he seemed to enjoy intimidating anyone who got in his way. "Old man, get out of the way," one of the bikers yelled as he drove past James's car. James tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He could feel the tension rising in his chest, but he remained calm. He had survived bombing raids, nights in freezing mud, and the fear of losing his comrades. A few rowdy young bikers weren't going to make him back down. He slowed down slightly, letting the closest one pass, all the while keeping his eyes fixed on the road. The bikers began to surround him, banging on the car, honking their horns, and shouting to scare him. Insults flew. "Get your ass. You old man." James took a deep breath. He knew he had to stay in control of the situation. Fighting physically would be dangerous, but he still had another weapon, his mind, and the contacts he had acquired during his life as a veteran. For now, he drove calmly, observing each of the bikers, memorizing their faces, their names when they shouted, and their arrogant attitudes. He knew that too abrupt a reaction could cause an accident, but he also knew that he had to find a way to stop this harassment before it escalated. James's calm contrasted with the chaos around him. And in his mind, an idea began to take root. Sometimes, a simple phone call to the right person could solve what seemed impossible at first glance. The bikers weren't content to just follow James anymore. They began to surround his old Chevrolet, their bikes roaring so close that the vibrations made the steering wheel tremble. Rick Malone, the leader of the group, approached the driver's side door, rapping hard on the metal. "Old man, do you think you can ignore us?" he shouted, his face hidden behind his black helmet. James sat impassively. Every knock against his car reminded him of the chaos of war, but also of the lessons he'd learned. Panic solves nothing, and showing fear is a luxury one can't afford. "Calm down," James said, his voice firm but calm. "You're on the road, and so am I, and I don't want any accidents." But his words fell on deaf ears. Another biker, younger and visibly drunk on his power, punched the passenger side door, leaving a deep dent. The metallic screech echoed through the hot afternoon air. James knew the situation could quickly escalate. He glanced around. Passers-by had stopped, some surprised, others frightened. He understood that escalation was inevitable if nothing came to interrupt these arrogant young people. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment to focus. Memories of battlefields, perilous missions, and fallen comrades reminded him that there was always a strategic solution, even in the face of fear. An idea began to form in his mind. He knew someone who could command respect and intervene quickly. A simple phone call could change the outcome of this confrontation. James took a deep breath and placed his hand on the inside pocket of his jacket, where he kept his old phone. There was no time to waste. Every second counted, and every mistake could be fatal. The time had come to act, but not by force. James knew that true power lies not in muscles, but in experience, patience, and knowing who to turn to. James took a deep breath and placed his hand on the inside pocket of his jacket, where he kept his old phone. The bikers continued their harassment, banging on the bodywork and honking their horns relentlessly. But James remained calm. His age wasn't a weakness, it was an asset. He knew he still had powerful allies, men and women who respected his journey and could intervene quickly. He took out the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Each sound of the key echoed like a reminder of his youth and his years in the army. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Henderson? Is that you?" the voice said, slightly surprised but full of respect. "Robert, it's James," he replied calmly. "I'm on the main road in Willow Creek. A group of aggressive bikers is harassing me and the situation could escalate. I need your help immediately." On the other end of the line, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Carter, his former commander and now head of public safety, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Stay where you are, James. I'm sending reinforcements." "Stay calm and don't do anything risky," Carter replied. James hung up and felt a wave of relief. He wasn't alone. His call would change the situation. The bikers, however, were unaware of the authority that was about to intervene. They thought they were intimidating a defenseless old man, but James knew that true power often lies in connections and strategy, not brute force. He took the wheel again, moving slowly, watching the bikers continue to circle his car, oblivious to the fact that their intimidation was coming to an end. Minutes passed, but soon, the siren of an official car sounded in the distance. James felt a thrill of satisfaction. The situation was about to tip in his favor. And for the first time since the bikers had appeared, he no longer felt fear. There was justice to come, and he knew this would be a memorable day for Willow Creek. Just minutes after James's call, the roar of an official vehicle was heard behind the bikers. The sirens were soft, but loud enough to attract attention. The young bikers, who thought they could terrorize a lonely old man, froze. "What the?" muttered Rick Malone, the group leader, watching the blue lights flash in the rearview mirror. Public security vehicles and local patrols arrived as reinforcements, blocking the road on both sides. The bikers found themselves surrounded, unable to continue their intimidation. The chaos they had caused instantly turned to confusion and panic. James, sitting in his Chevrolet, watched the scene with an almost majestic calm. His hands, firm on the steering wheel, no longer trembled. He had already experienced situations far more perilous than this one. These young men were nothing compared to the dangers he had faced in his life. An officer approached, immediately recognizing James. "Mr. Henderson," he said respectfully. "We received your call. Don't worry, we're taking control of the situation." The bikers, now aware of the gravity of their mistake, backed away. Rick Malone tried to speak, but his voice trembled under the pressure of authority and witnesses. James slowly poked his head out of the car and said in a calm but firm voice, "You made a mistake. Underestimating someone never pays off, especially not a veteran who has learned patience and respect." The bikers, humiliated and overwhelmed, had no choice but to give in. The intervention of public security had transformed a dangerous situation into a simple reminder that respect is not something you ask for, it is something you demand. James, meanwhile, slowly continued his journey, but this time accompanied by a security escort, watching the bikers walk away, sheepish and silent. For him, this was not a victory against brute force, but against arrogance and ignorance. The bikers, surrounded and overwhelmed, began to realize the magnitude of their mistake. Rick Malone, the group's leader, stared at James with a look of shame and aborted defiance. Fear now replaced arrogance. An officer approached Rick and his companions. "You harassed an elderly and vulnerable citizen. It will not happen again. You will apologize." The young men exchanged embarrassed glances. Rick slowly lowered his head, his jaw clenched. Then, in a shaky but audible voice, "Mr. Henderson. We didn't mean to be disrespectful. Really." James crossed his arms, looking at the group with a mixture of firmness and calm. This wasn't about revenge, but about lessons and dignity. "Respect is non-negotiable," he said simply. "Underestimating someone because of their age is a mistake you won't soon forget." The other bikers, still embarrassed, apologized timidly, some barely whispering. James nodded, accepting the apology but letting the weight of the lesson sink in. Around him, several neighbors and passers-by had witnessed the scene. Some whispered among themselves, "That old man calmed them down without raising his hand." Others took photos and videos, impressed by James's quiet courage. Rick Malone finally walked away, head bowed, his companions following him. James felt a quiet satisfaction. He had transformed a confrontation that could have turned violent into a demonstration of calm, authority, and respect. As he continued on his journey, he realized that this day would be memorable not only for him, but for the entire Willow Creek community. The young riders had learned a lesson they would never forget, and James had reminded everyone that experience and wisdom are invisible but powerful forces. After the bikers left the road, James Henderson slowly made his way back to the market, his old steering wheel clutched in his hands. The roar of his Chevrolet seemed almost soothing after the tumult of the previous minutes. The afternoon heat seemed less oppressive now that the threat was gone. Around him, neighbors were coming out of their homes and businesses, some whispering to each other, others coming to greet James. "James! Did you see that? You were amazing. No one would dare bother you again," whispered an old neighbor. James smiled softly, a mixture of fatigue and satisfaction in his eyes. He hadn't meant to impress anyone, but he knew his actions had left a mark. The lesson went far beyond this single incident. It reminded everyone that respect and dignity depend not on physical strength, but on courage and experience. As he walked through the market, the shopkeepers greeted him warmly, some offering him free vegetables or flowers, a silent gesture of gratitude for what he had just demonstrated. The children looked at him with admiration, as if a hero had just passed among them. Michael, his son, arrived shortly after, having heard about the incident from the neighbors. He hugged his father. "Dad, I don't know how you do it. At your age, you remain stronger and calmer than most young people I know." "Son," James replied, smiling, "strength is not always in the arms. Sometimes it is in the head, in patience, and in the knowledge that can help you when needed." James spent the rest of the day preparing his garden for his friend's visit, but his mind remained calm, satisfied that he had transformed a moment of fear into a demonstration of calm and wisdom. Willow Creek had learned an important lesson that day, and James knew he had just written a small chapter of history for his community. In the days following the incident, news of James Henderson's confrontation with the bikers spread like wildfire in Willow Creek. Residents told the story to their friends and neighbors, describing how an 89-year-old man had stood up to a group of young bullies without ever losing his composure. At the local cafe, the discussions all revolved around James. "Did you see how calm he remained?" a customer asked, her eyes shining with admiration. "Yes," replied the cafe owner, "it's incredible. At his age, he might seem vulnerable, but no. He's a veteran. He commands respect naturally." Even the bikers, some of whom had tried to downplay the incident, began to feel the shame and seriousness of their behavior. Several young people came timidly to knock on the door of James's house to offer sincere apologies. Rick Malone, the leader, stepped forward first. "Mr. Henderson, I really wanted to apologize for what we did. We should never have, you know what, harassed you." James looked at them one by one, his eyes piercing but full of kindness. respect cannot be bought or demanded. It must be earned. Today you learned an important lesson. Never forget it. The young people nodded, impressed and humbled. The community began to see James not only as a veteran, but as a figure of wisdom and moral authority. Children looked up to him with admiration, and adults sought his advice, whether it was about gardening, life, or even conflict management. This simple confrontation had changed far more than Willow Creek's main road. It had transformed the collective perception. An old man could still influence his environment and remind everyone that courage and dignity are timeless. James sat on his garden bench that evening, watching the sunset and feeling at peace. He knew that, despite his age, he had just conveyed a powerful message: experience, patience, and wisdom are forces that surpass violence and arrogance. A few days after the incident, James's son, Michael Henderson, arrived in Willow Creek. He had heard about the incident from neighbors and wanted to see his father's condition for himself. Entering the house, he found James sitting in his favorite armchair, a newspaper in his hand but his gaze lost in the garden. Michael sat down opposite him, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad. I heard what happened with those bikers. I can't believe you handled it like that." James put down the newspaper and smiled, a calm but proud smile. "Michael, it's not a question of belief. It's a question of composure and knowing when to act. You know, in life, it's not always strength that counts, but wisdom and courage." Michael shook his head, impressed. "At your age, you could sit back and let the world go on. But you took control and showed everyone what true respect is." James placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Fear is useless, son. It paralyzes. What matters is patience, reflection, and choosing to do what's right. Even at 89, you can still protect your dignity and that of others." Michael smiled, touched by his father's wisdom. He realized that James wasn't just surviving his old age, he was living life to the fullest, with integrity and courage. Later that day, a few neighbors came to greet James, bringing fruit from the market or simply words of gratitude. The entire community now seemed to look to him as a source of strength and wisdom. James, modest as ever, accepted these gestures calmly, knowing that the real victory was not having frightened the bikers, but having inspired an entire town. In the days that followed, Willow Creek seemed transformed. Residents still spoke of James Henderson and his confrontation with the bikers, but now with a mixture of respect and admiration. Even the neighborhood's youth, once bullies, were beginning to look to him as a moral authority figure. One morning, as James was watering his flowers, Rick Malone appeared shyly at the end of the driveway. His face betrayed embarrassment and sincerity. "Mr. Henderson," Rick murmured. We wanted to thank you, for what you showed us. I'll never forget that lesson." James stopped and gently put down his watering can. "Respect is earned, Rick. Today, you realize that attacking someone out of arrogance is pointless. What matters is dignity, patience, and wisdom." Rick nodded, his eyes shining with understanding. His friends hung back a little, silent but attentive. James smiled slightly. He had sown something deeper than fear, respect. In the city, the news spread even faster. Children told the story in schools, shopkeepers spoke to their customers, and neighbors greeted him with genuine admiration. James continued his daily routine, but every action now seemed charged with meaning: planting flowers, talking to children, greeting passers-by. His quiet life became a living example of courage and dignity. What began as a simple incident of harassment had transformed into a symbol of respect and wisdom. James Henderson, an 89-year-old veteran, reminded everyone that age and experience are silent but powerful forces, capable of transforming not just a confrontation, but an entire community. As the weeks passed, Willow Creek returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. The entire town seemed more respectful, more attentive to the dignity of each individual, inspired by the quiet courage of James Henderson. One morning, as James sat on his garden bench, Michael came and sat beside him. "Dad," he said, smiling, "I think you just showed everyone what courage really means. Even I've never been so impressed. James nodded, his eyes bright but calm. Courage is not measured by physical strength or age, son. It is measured by how one faces fear and acts wisely. Today, we all learned an important lesson. On the street, neighbors greeted James with genuine respect. Some children waved at him, while others told passers-by how the 89-year-old veteran stood up to the bikers. Even Rick Malone, the biker leader, had begun working in the community, helping clean parks and mentoring young people, in memory of the lesson James had taught them. James sat on his bench and watched the sunset. A deep serenity came over him. He knew that what he had accomplished was not just a personal victory, but a lasting example of dignity, patience, and courage for the entire city. At 89, James Henderson had proven that strength isn't always in the arms, but in the mind, the heart, and experience. And in this small town of Willow Creek, his name would be remembered as a symbol of a man who faced fear with calm and wisdom, and who transformed fear into respect.